A seemingly suspicious drink sends an Iowa man to the hospital.
This circumstance was unusual and concerning.
A year later, a break in the case would result in the arrest of his own wife. The investigation began to unfold in July of 2024 when the husband of 39-year-old Daisy Zantjer reported the alleged poisoning to the Pleasantville Police Department. According to authorities, she's accused of spiking her husband's drink with tetrahydrozoline, an active ingredient in eye drops.
Well, it's unusual occurrence. I mean, there are reported cases of children getting the eyedropper bottles and accidentally drinking some, or parents unknowingly giving a young infant the eye drops, and they are susceptible to absorption, in a higher level than an adult would be.
Police say Zantjer put the eye drops in her husband's drink on two separate occasions, nearly a year prior to the investigation in July of 2023. According to charging documents, Zantjer confessed to the shocking crime during her police interview. It's unclear how much eye drops Zantjer used to allegedly poison her husband. However, Dr. Mary Jumbelik explains once the tetrahydrozoline is ingested, the ingredient reacts quickly in the body.
Well, because of its preparation, it's meant as an eye drop that can be readily absorbed through a mucous membrane really quickly. So it gets absorbed very quickly. So the effects would be, fairly quick as well. Of course, depends on the amount that's given and absorbed, and whether it's in a simple drink or you're having a big meal and it's put in that. So, it's a little bit hard to judge, but it would have fairly quick, effects. And one of the effects would be, if you had enough absorbed into your system, drowsiness, sleepiness, maybe a little blood pressure drop, so that if you are someone who runs a low blood pressure, you might notice that more quickly. If you're someone who runs a high blood pressure, you might not notice that effect so readily.
According to local news outlet KCCI, Zantjer's husband did have to be rushed to the hospital after ingesting the eye drops-laced drinks for symptoms including struggling to breathe. While it's unclear how much tetrahydrozoline was ingested by Zantjer's husband, Dr. Jumbelik says he had enough in his system to trigger symptoms.
Well, it's not well studied. There are reports of levels in people post-mortem that have been exposed, either intentionally swallowing it themselves, or they've been killed, or it's been added as some type of addition to other drugs that are being taken. So, unless we know his drug level at the time that it was administered, and we're just kind of working backwards a little bit, but he was symptomatic. He got enough to feel the effects of the poison, the toxin, and it can cause low blood pressure. It can cause an irregular heart rate, and can cause breathing problems. It can cause CNS depression, so getting sleepy or drowsy, from it can be an early effect. It doesn't seem to have the effect that some other poisons have, with nausea and diarrhea and GI disturbance. But certainly he got to the hospital, in quick enough time.
Daisy Zantjer was arrested for the crime. She faces charges of 2 counts of administering harmful substances and 2 counts of domestic abuse, assault, injury, or mental illness. Zantjer's husband luckily survived the alleged poisoning, and while it's unclear how much was used, any larger of an amount could have been lethal.
I mean, as much as, or as little, I should say, as half a teaspoon for an infant might lead to catastrophic events, but for an adult, it would be larger, and the bottles themselves are, fairly small quantity. So I don't think we're talking in the order of drops for that. But again, I'm not sure there's a lot of information on that. And so testing their blood, their body fluids to see what the level is, and kind of working backwards, this level gave them this amount of symptom. You might have some science behind it if you could do that.
It's unclear what type of drink Daisy Zantjer allegedly placed the eye drops in, but Dr. Jumbelik explains it might not have been obvious the victim knew he was being poisoned.
I don't know. So much would depend on, it's black coffee, it has sugar, it has cream, it has other flavoring in it, the quantity that's used. One, two drops, a whole bottle. I don't know. I just think that would be difficult. But certainly, if you're suspicious, I suppose, at that level, if you weren't thinking about it, maybe you would notice something's different than your usual, than what you are used to tasting. Someone else might not, but you might notice it because you have a certain, recipe for your coffee, how you drink it every day. So, but are you an astute person or not? I don't know.
And here's what else we know about Daisy Zantjer. Years prior to the alleged poisoning, she wrote blogs about the dangers of everyday household products. In a post to LinkedIn from October 30th of 2018, Zantjer wrote in one blog post, "I'm a Christian woman who wants to do right by her family, and part of that is keeping them free of harmful chemicals and other toxins that could destroy their body." She would go on to write at the time she found her business when her husband needed a change of employment. She said around that time she did an interview online and found out about the awful truth about what's in the products she was using. She wrote she lost a friend to complications of Crohn's disease, which made her want to improve her health. She would end the post by writing, quote, "I want to see others who care about themselves join me in being toxic-free and financially free." Fast forward nearly 6 years later, Zantjer is behind bars accused of using an everyday product to poison her husband. Authorities have remained relatively tight-lipped as to the details of this case, including why Zantjer allegedly poisoned her husband or how her husband discovered he had allegedly been poisoned by her. Although he had to be taken to the hospital initially for symptoms, Dr. Jumbelik says it might not have been readily recognized as poisoning.
I don't think so. National Medical Services Laboratory did a scientific article back in September of 2022, and they were looking at all the cases that had come across their laboratory analysis, and some that were suspected, some that weren't, where it had turned positive in any of the cases. And out of 120 or so cases, they had about 10 that had very high levels, and they looked very specifically at the circumstances of those. A few were suicides, one was a homicide, one was suspicious. So I guess what it tells us is that it might not be readily recognized unless someone thinks of it clinically and thinks to specifically request for it, or you're saying, well, just look for everything. I don't know what I'm looking for. It might come up in a very comprehensive test like that.
But for any potential trial, she explains poisoning cases are a little different.
Well, I am more familiar with working with, the deceased victims, but I think poisoning is always a difficult thing. You have to time associate the event. It's not so simple as a gunshot wound or a stab wound where it happens and then the person dies or has the injury. Poisoning can have a variable expression: quickly, not so quickly, delayed. So it requires a lot of investigative work. It requires statements, witness, consideration of motive, may be very important in a case of poisoning.
As Daisy Zantjer's fate remains yet to be seen, Dr. Jumbelik explains it might not be the last we hear about a few slips in the drink that was allegedly meant to do harm.
Well, I mean, poisoning has been around for so very, very long. We can just go back to Rome and and think of those cases. But Agatha Christie found, a lot of leverage in literature. So those are fictional cases, but she was going on known entities and what was happening in the world around her when she wrote these stories about poisoning. Uh, so I'd say it gets a lot of play. Certainly now, I don't know statistically if it's more prevalent or less prevalent, but we certainly have access to more chemicals, more substances now, and a lot more information on the internet. So people can research, they can look up effects and doses and all types of things. So I think from a psychological point of view, though, poisonings are a certain category of killer. you know, that plan or try to distance themselves, from the actual murder.
Daisy Zantjer is being held on a $12,000 cash or surety bond. She's expected to appear in court for a preliminary hearing on August 8th. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.